Um, Anybody know what today is called on the church calendar? It we're not at Friday. It feels like Friday. We have pizza and there's no school tomorrow, but anybody know what it's called? Maundy Thursday. That's right. And it starts a very important week for Christians all around the world. Actually, our Easter started last Sunday. Does anybody go to a church where kids walk through the service with palm branches? Isn't that the worst idea ever? I helped those things happen for like 20 years. And basically, if you give a kid a palm branch, it's going to turn into a lightsaber or a sword or something to knock another kid with. But that's usually how we celebrate Palm Sunday. Well, on Thursday, Maundy Thursday today, we remember the Last Supper and the betrayal of Jesus and his trials. On Friday, we commemorate Jesus's honestly just horrible death. But on Sunday, Easter Sunday, we joyously celebrate the day that Jesus appeared to his followers, alive and breathing 3 days after he died. Did you notice, though, that in the middle of those 3 important days, there's one missing? We have Thursday. We have Friday. What happened to Saturday? It's kind of the forgotten middle of the Easter story. In most communities around us, in shopping centers and parks and churches, there's something crazy going on Saturday. They're called by a lot of different names: Easter egg hunts, spring extravaganzas, excitement. These are real names I looked up, sorry. Bunny Bonanza, Spring Fest, or Sensational Springtacular. These events advertise plastic eggs filled with goodies, photos with the Easter Bunny, inflatable slides and bouncy houses, live music, carnival games, crafts, and even petting zoos, those poor animals. And I really don't have a problem with these events. They keep kids busy and happy, at least when they're not getting run over by other kids trying to get eggs, or, gee, when the sugar crash happens. You don't want to be there. But basically, I think Easter egg hunts are a cover up. They're bright and colorful and exciting and sugar filled fun, but they cover up what really happens on that Saturday between Good Friday and Easter morning. That Saturday in the first Easter week was anything but fun. On that Friday, 2,000 years ago, Jesus became one of the many victims of the Roman killing machine. He hadn't started a tax revolt or plotted to overthrow the government. He had just taught about love and kindness and radical forgiveness. He talked about starting a different kind of kingdom, a kingdom that you didn't have to wait for eternity to live in, but you could live in now. That made the Jewish religious leaders so angry that they planned and they plotted and they found a way to get Jesus executed. I can't even imagine what that horrible Friday was like for Jesus's followers. The men and women who lived with him for 3 years, listening to his teaching and witnessing the miracles he did, calming storms, feeding enormous crowds with just a snack. Sorry. Healing people that suffered from illnesses and disabilities for their entire life. These disciples had pledged their devotion to him and his kingdom. Then they watched as Jesus was arrested and brought to trial before religious leaders called the Sanhedrin, and then before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. And then they stood at a distance and watched as Jesus died, beaten, bloody, and naked on that horrible cross. Sorry. And in the midst of that shocking grief, two members of the Sanhedrin, the same group that condemned Jesus, came forward and asked Pilate if they could take Jesus' body off the cross where he had died. Those people who've taken my class know that usually the bodies were left there on the crosses on the road so that passersby could see what happens if you mess with the Roman government. They wanted those bodies to be a warning. So when these two men, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, asked the governor for Jesus's body, they were really being pretty brave. They were associating themselves with an executed criminal. And for some reason, Pontius Pilate said yes. They could have Jesus's body. They could put it in a grave to decompose in private. Joseph and Nicodemus may not have noticed, but there was a small group of women who were watching them from a distance. They watched as the men washed Jesus's body and wrapped it in linen cloth. These watching women had traveled to Jerusalem with Jesus. They'd actually been accompanying Jesus and his disciples for quite a while and providing financial support for the group. Luke 23, 55 and 56 tells us what these women did as Friday drew to a close. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. These women, some of who had been healed by Jesus, went back to where they were staying and began the long wait for Sunday morning to come. Now, when we read the events of Friday, we know that there's a purpose for the horror. God's incredible plan of forgiveness, rooted in his unconditional love for us, was being played out. Jesus' death on Friday began the process of freeing us from sin and the penalty of eternal death that comes with it. That's why, despite all the horrors of that day, we call it Good Friday. But to the people who lived through that pivotal day, it seemed anything but good. You see, we know the end of the story, but we need to remember that the people living it didn't. Imagine those devoted women followers when they woke up on Saturday morning. They were facing the reality of life without Jesus. I think we want to ignore Saturday after Good Friday because it's difficult to imagine the pain, the confusion, the hopelessness Jesus' followers must have been experiencing. What did those women who had loved and served Jesus do on that Saturday? It was a Sabbath, so they couldn't distract themselves with chores or take a long walk in the fresh air. They had to sit in their grief. They had no hope of ever seeing Jesus again. They must have wondered why his life had ended so horrifically. After all, wasn't he the Messiah? Hadn't God sent him and empowered him to establish a kingdom that was ruled by God? Why had God let Jesus suffer and die? Why had evil won? These women disciples must have had so many questions for God, hard questions. But we know they didn't abandon their relationship with him. They continued to keep the Sabbath. They obeyed the rules for what to do and not to do on that day that God had set aside for rest and prayer. What must have their prayers been like? Maybe they just sat in silence together, trying to bear the grief and confusion. Maybe they just waited. They did have something to do in the morning. They could take the spices and perfumes they had prepared to Jesus' tomb. And we need to remember that they did not go to that grave on Sunday morning expecting to meet a living Jesus. They went there to put those spices and perfumes on his dead body. Hmm. Sorry. It kind of chokes me up a little bit. I think we skip right over that Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday because it is too painful. Such deep emotional pain, so many unanswered questions, so much loss, and absolutely no hope for life returning to anything near normal or good again. That's an extremely uncomfortable place to be. Now, we haven't probably faced anything nearly as intensely bleak as those women did during that long ago Saturday. But maybe you have experienced a time when life was so painful and dark that you wondered if there was any reason to hope that life would ever return to something near normal and good again. Life will serve up dark times. If you haven't experienced it yet, I'm sorry to say, you probably will. And just the fact that you're experiencing life's darkness does not mean that you have necessarily done anything wrong. Were the women disciples of Jesus suffering on that Saturday because they had done something wrong? No. They'd been devoted to Jesus. They had followed him. They had sacrificed for him. They had loved him. And they suffered deeply. We live in a broken world, a fallen world filled with conflict and illness and injustice and dark days. When the darkness comes, I just ask that you please remember these women's disciples' experience. We can use it as a little glimpse of how maybe to endure. Number one, don't stop talking to God. He can handle your darkest emotions. You can't scare him or chase him away. Cry out to him. In the Bible, we have examples of people talking to God in their darkest moments. If you haven't read Psalm 39 or 88, take a look. And the amazing thing is that God wanted those dark moments of talking to God to be recorded in our Bible so that we can have them today. He wanted you and me to be assured that he understands human suffering in all of its variations. Number two, just keep taking little, small steps in obedience to God. The women disciples continued to do the ordinary tasks of life even in the midst of their despair. They observed the Sabbath, they prepared the spices, they did what they could. It might not have seemed like it mattered, but it did because they simply continued to move slowly forward in the midst of darkness. They were in the perfect position to witness was what God was going to do. They witnessed the biggest plot twist in history. Unfortunately, this kind of help in dark times is only available to followers of Jesus. Without him, there is no hope waiting on Sunday morning. There's no happy twist in the storyline that turns darkness into light. But the good news is that you can make a decision to give your life to Jesus today. Any of the amazing teachers and administrators, the school would love to talk to you about making that decision or discuss any of your questions. And believe it or not, they all care about what's best for you, even when it doesn't feel like it. The women who waded through the pain of Saturday didn't know they would be the first people on earth to witness the glory of Easter morning. As soon as the light began to break the darkness of Saturday night, the women bundled up the spices and perfumes that they had prepared and headed for the tomb. But when they got to the tomb on Sunday morning, the stone was gone. Jesus' body was gone, and life would never be the same again for them or for us. Now there's hope in the midst of the darkness because we know the real end of the Easter story. Jesus wins. And with him, we can enjoy victory over sin and death and darkness. Please pray with me. Dear God, our Father, you are good and you have a plan. We may not know it. We don't feel the need to explain it to us, Lord. Please give us peace in the midst of that lack of knowing. You are good in the bright light of morning, and you are good in the midst of darkness. Thank you for the hope your children have in the knowledge that you will make all wrongs right. You will dry all tears and live with your people for eternity. Amen.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. CVCS is a Christian TK through 12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Please visit cvcs.org/podcasts to listen to the variety of shows our students produce on our campus. You can also find all of our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and others. We would also appreciate you subscribing to and leaving a review of this show and the other shows on our network in your podcast player of choice. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to us, please email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the school, this is Mr. Jasper, the executive producer of the podcast network. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for more.